tēnā rawara e tātou mā hoki tonu mai. Oh, this is getting sickening. I'd say that would have to be cyber criminals, and they're just too jealous, and they can't handle the truth. Sometimes we put out a lot of facts out there into the public arena where they don't like to be, appearing with the truth enshrouding them. I'm forever laughing at these people because they're not realizing that they're not getting anywhere by doing that, and they're not going to stop our kōrero, they're not going to stop our momentum, and they're never, ever going to stop our success. It's highly likely that these people doing this, the cyber criminals, are kahungunu tūhoe, and also are people that may be central to Wairarapa Tararua. Of course, we're beaming from the west, TeTaiHauauru AukatiTai, from the HawhauaoMo, and we are bringing to you all of that vital kōrero around He Whakaputanga 1835. Now, I bet you these cyber criminals actually think, I bet they're mob too, and I'm not silly. But if they're the mob who I think they are, then they're only idiots, and they actually think that their false stories are going to get them somewhere. Okay? And that once all of the truths that I have told about them actually end up involved with any of their lies going to the police, we'll soon see who wins that battle. Okay? Now, don't you say anything. Don't you say anything, but there is also a an ex-whānau element to all of that. Now, that ex-whānau is part of the most jealous of all of those that are harbouring jealousies against us, and we've had to put up with this for years and years now. I've had to put up with this attacks on my personal life for years, and since I was little. These are senior siblings that the people that I'm referring to are senior siblings that know no bounds when it comes to abusing those junior, because they think that they should be the stronger of the two, which is not the case. If you're a junior and you hold a gifting that is special to that whānau and to your lines of descent, and you also hold an aligned number of traits towards a chiefship within that whānau, then you rightfully should take that up. Okay? I took that up, and they were already ruining things. They were abusing me, they were doing all sorts of things. You know what? They've abused all three generations of my whānau, me, my kids, and muko. So, you know what? They're in some big trouble, because that's not all that they've done in their lives. If they want to, and I don't think they're going to end up there, remain outside of the here, of the hinaki, then I would be pretty encouraged to advise them to back all that up, because they're not going to get anywhere. Okay? And I've already got a number of people. I've got private detectives, I've got police, I've got gangs as well, I've got whānau, I've got lots of different authorities amongst legal fraternities and legal authorities in the country supporting and supporting me, my work as well, and watching my back. So just a warning to those cyber criminals that if you are who I think you are, you're not getting anywhere, and you're not going to get anywhere. And it's the same thing. It's been the same thing for you all along. I mean, Tūhoe trained you to fail because they know. That's a hugely psychological thing when you train people to fail. You set them up to fail. You know why? Because they're people who are not likely to succeed in a certain space. And if you train them up to fail, they will keep failing and keep failing and keep failing until they find the best way to find success, find their way to success. And that's what they wanted in Waikaremoana, for them to find the best way. And the best way is not what you lot are doing at the moment. See? If you would stop being arrogant, stop blowing, and start listening, then you might find that way. See? Now, don't bother trying to look at me coming back to a whānau that doesn't actually exist. And it never has. To me, it's always been a mob up. Okay, and I don't mind sharing kōrero like this. Aroha mai, everyone who's getting into our kōrero on he whakaputanga. I don't mind sharing kōrero like this because it matters at the moment. Because I think these people are the ex-whānau mob. That's who's doing this to us today. And I'm a little upset, you know, that they're cutting our kōrero into 3, and who knows, they might even cut it into 4 or 5, but I don't care. I'm going to be sharing this right across the mutu, just like the last kōrero that I'm going to be sharing right across the mutu straight after our kōrero today. Okay, which doesn't finish actually yet. It finishes around about 20 past 4. So e tatama, that's the lineup of our kōrero. That's where we're coming to, and then we're finally going to focus on the reo, which was not what they started off with, or maybe it was around the other way. Maybe they started off with the reo. Those that they got to assist them, and plus those that assisted, those who assisted them in support, perhaps they did not come together to bring that kōrero into the translation, into the English actually first, but second. Okay? Second, but actually first. So what I'm saying is that, just like I said back in 2022, mid-2022, I said they had to have started with the English. Okay? It's just the nature of both those documents, TeTiriti and He Whakaputanga. They had to, because, yeah, I mean, why start with something that you find very, very difficult to write in or speak in at the moment? I mean, they might have been able to speak the reo, the missionaries, but why begin with that? They were best to start with framing everything in the reo that they were used to, so they used English first. See, why does that matter so much? That matters because the whole of the direction of the actual translation of what they said in English needs to be absolutely literal, absolutely scrupulously close to the literal version of English, and translating in depth and laterally if need be each and every one of the contexts that exists from right throughout that English version of the kōrero to go into that document. Okay? And so, amazing document, eh? So I've got my cushion here behind my back. I'm just keeping my cushion here and keeping comfortable. But look, let's focus back on, let's get back on track, back with He Whakaputanga 1835, and realizing that no, even though this was not in the case an act of fraudulence that was geared up towards a fraudulent act in the immediacy, it definitely was aiming at one to come in the future. Okay, so definitely the precursor to TeTiriti, and definitely the way in which the Crown had sought to dupe as many of the tūpuna mātua of our people, especially in the north, into that first signing. And look who came. I mean, all the senior ships were there, all the junior ships were there, and they came in force. Okay, there might have been junior ships out of all of those different tribes, but they came in force. And so they achieved what they wanted to achieve. Okay? Awesome, eh? Awesome, eh? Once you understand the kōrero around things and exactly what the situation is at that time, you understand, e tātou mā, that exactly what happened is far from, for most of us, very, very far from exactly where our mindsets might be at around the particular document central to our kōrero today. Okay, e whakaputanga 1835 is quite a document, even though not as successful as TeTiriti. To me it was quite amazing in that it was successful just as a result of its actual kōrero. Taken literally, the tūpuna, we know, the native ear, te taringa reo take take, te taringa hapu iwi, te taringa reo hapu iwi, was always going to warm to this particular document. Probably even more so, especially for the senior ships, than TeTiriti. So that's probably why the senior ships showed out in force. Why? Because the duping received via he whakaputanga 1835 was very, very successful. In fact, highly successful. And in fact, even though signatories came slowly, and they came over the whole of the 5 years to follow the actual first signing, e tātou mā, what we have in the end is actually, when you look at that first signing, so many arrived at that first signing. That shows you there was far more than 50. There was far more than 50, I'll tell you that much. They showed up at their first signing. Okay, and then they did a number of other signings in the north over the 7 months to follow. Okay, so let's keep all of that in perspective, e tātou mā, because what actually happened after that is that the Crown turned around, because nothing changed. Okay, nothing changed. They were still disgruntled after that 7 months, and they handed everything over to the New Zealand Crown Corporation, set up the New Zealand Crown Corporation, probably out of spite. They were so disgruntled, they set it all up over New South Wales, got them under the American Treasury, USA Treasury, the US Treasury, and then they came into the country all ready to take over from the fraudulent acts of the Crown members, representatives in the country, representative of Westminster. Okay, and so if we go back to 1840, to that first signing, there was a lot of disgruntledness, a lot of disgruntled attitude and nature and character of the Crown that spewed forth as a result of being unanimously turned down by the senior ships in the country. Was that going to reach the rest of the country? Oh, they wouldn't know the Crown, but they would have reached the rest of the country automatically. Okay, they went to know, but if they wondered whether that would hit the rest of the country, yes, it would have. And so this is why, if we remember back to my last kōrero in the north, I said to you they were amused. Even where there was one signee or two signees, our tūpuna mātua would have been very amused in the least. Because the senior ships did not trust their act of entreatment and their act of, kind what do you call that? Treatment in goodwill, the goodwill that seemed to be on the surface of everything, prevailing over the whole of events. That certainly wasn't the case by then, and especially after the evening. Our Tahumaakaakanuimatua were very hurt as well. They were upset that what they had signed wasn't actually exactly what the Crown now was saying that they had signed. They were disgruntled, they disagreed with it. However, the Crown still put in the English version that they had handed over sovereignty. A load of crap. An absolute load of crap. Let's get that into our I te roro whakaaro a I te hinangaro whakaaro. Okay? Let's keep that locked solidly in there. Okay? And let's realise e tātou mā that doesn't change. It doesn't change. Okay? And even 5 years before, it never ever looked like it. It never ever looked like it was going to. Okay, but everyone was duped in. The North was fully duped in. I mean, they were still scrapping and shooting each other in the South. So, everyone had, bad feelings about what was happening in the South, and the pressure of the time really, really told, especially around 1835. Okay? Because the second wave of musket warfare was about to take place. And that took us to some tataupoinamu that were very, very important around those times. One in Wairarapa and the other in Te Whanganui Ōrotu, Te Whanganui Atara. And, a total conquering of the, right into Tūranganui a Kiwa, out to Tūwharetoa, out to Taupo Nui a Tia. And from there all the way down into Wellington and across the Cook Strait and into the South Island. Okay? Some very, very successful conquerings of, yes, you named it, none other than Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. Okay? And, though we're not proud of that whole period in time because it was way out of character, wasn't tūturu, but everyone got carried away over that time. Things had spilled over. A number of debates were taking place within our cultural, spiritual, super tribal way of doing things. Things were challenging our central beliefs that without looking like I'm trying to explain. I know that this in part would explain what happened over that time. But really, when, they lost it. They lost it. That's all that there is to explain what happened over that period. But prior to that, a number of challenges were facing our people over that time. And it's likely that the same challenge that we're faced with today was one of those challenges, where a great percentage of our people still want to hold on to the pantheonist way of our tupuna matua and the occult and the repugnant way of our tupuna matua of old. Why? Because it worked successfully. Why? Because it's tūturu anyway. And why also? Well, none other than because they know, they think that they can get it working successfully again. We don't think so. We disagree with them. We're one of the groups that are totally opposed to that. Why? Because we know it to be entirely corrupt. It's corrupted that whole area of our culture. The spiritual nature, the cultural aspects and concepts involved within that whole area of our cultural, spiritual, super tribal way of life, totally corroded. Okay, and so regardless of the karakia still existent, we look at it as corroded. Why? Because let's put it this way: if you put a whole institution of karakia in the hands of idiots, what you got? What's your outcome going to be? Okay, and that's what's been happening. Idiots have been getting their hands on this stuff. Another question for those people, apart from what's the outcome going to be, and that's what we've got today. A whole lot of outcomes that have been consequential as a result of the practices, the corrupted practices of idiots. Okay? Secondly, who were the people where the negative side and the repugnant and the occult were applied to? Criminals. Now, how many of those cases, there are many cases in the motu, where actually they weren't applied to criminals. See, you look at that, the whole of that area. How long is it going to take us to get that right? Too long. We can't wait that long. Okay? So we fully disagree with that whole area operating in the way that it wants to today. Okay, and we've gone all the way back to the original institution of our ancient ancestors. Of course, as you well know, all of that kōrero, and we've persevered from there, and we're building nicely and very, very successfully in the motu under the covenants of that particular institution. The entirety of it is just starting to come upon us now, especially those of us from amongst the most senior and the top 6 lines. Okay, so it's working successfully, and along with how the Lord sees that we can successfully work with our tūturutanga still in place, our customary way, minus, the occult, minus the negative, minus the repugnant, because we actually don't need them in order to operate successfully by law today. And to enforce the law today, we don't need them. Okay, we can enforce the law just as successfully today without them, and with all of the positive side. Without that positive side, we don't think our tūturutanga would operate as successfully. Okay? And that is the reason why we think that the Lord has asked us to operate in this way. Okay, because it's going to be workable. Yeah, thank you, Lord. Thank you, Iehouia, for all of that wisdom and knowledge and understanding of these things. So, in Jesus' mighty name. But we, just rolling along with our kōrero there e tatauma, what we need to be focusing on from here are the details by where, out of spite, the New Zealand Crown Corporation was brought in out of the simple reason that an enormous punishment was about to come for our tūpuna mātua, especially for seniorships who are about to get driven out of the way, fraudulently as well. Okay, now we know a bit about that brief kōrero, and so I'll keep it concise. And that is where around the early 1840s, like in Wairarapa, accessibility to the land, accessibility to non-customary transaction was being sought by the Crown. That's the New Zealand Crown Corporation. That's where they come in. Okay, and they started off in September 1840 with us. Okay, and this is where senior ships get destroyed out of the way. That was where that happened. Okay, because after the fraudulence of the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, you then had the land court. To pair with that, you already had the racial parliament of 1854. Added to that, you had the wars of 1858. Added to that, you had the Pai Pera Tapu of 1868. We had no way of surviving. Grey was on his way, Timau. Think about that. Think about that. And the severity of the way in which they dealt to our tūpuna mātua, with a special focus on the seniorities, because all the seniorities got wiped out of the way. Totally fraudulated out of the way. Every document that was signed during signings where land deeds were concerned were all fraudulated as being under the the juniorships that had agreed to the accessibility to the land and had agreed, like for instance in Wairarapa 1851, 52, 53. You had the accessibility to the land, so the deals were starting to be made. 53, done like a dog's dinner. Rangi WHawhauaoMo, gone. First signing over of land, first transacting of land, which gave them a foot in the door and able to transact right through the country. Why? Because they had wiped out all the seniorships and made sure through that fraudulent time in the country, made sure that the seniorships could have no mana rangatira in the land anymore without just cause, without reason. Okay, they could operate still on the ground. Ki ringa tonu hoki, ki te papa wenua, te matau te wenua. They could operate quite comfortably there. But e tatauma, that still didn't equate to that of, ariki, meko te hapu, tua kanakana, operating within their mana rangatira. They could not equate to that preeminence that they once had prior to all the fraudulence of that time. They had lost control of those lands. That was telling on them and their people. Their teina had turned on them. They were now divided from their teina. Pākehā were turned on them. They were now divided from Pākehā. See? And then the wars happened. There was an unbelievable political strategy by the New Zealand Crown Corporation. They took on the hurt of the Crown representatives over the 1840 period, and they put together a plan and a strategy to destroy the whole of our cultural, spiritual, super-tribal existence, with an especial focus on the seniorships, destroying them out of the way first, and then basically as the defrauding was to be used for, that we see clearly by 1912. We see that clearly by 1912, especially in Wairarapa e tatauma. What we have is, the securing of the actual fraudulence of that time. The whole securing. And then by 1970, well, all our land's just about gone right throughout the Motu. That's further securing and conclusion of the actual fraud, to take all our lands, to take all our mana rangatira, to take over in the country, fraudulently though too, I might add, and criminally, but also extremely this was to an extreme. They were suddenly here to racially take over and exert a superiority over our ancestors right throughout the Motu. whether it killed them or not. Okay? Whether it killed them or not. Now this was the true nature of what we were dealing with from the Crown's point of view. From the Crown's point of view. I'm not saying, in fact, the majority of Pākehā would have been quite different, but from the Crown point of view, this is what we were dealing with. Still remnants of the feudal way of doing things in Westminster, still remnants of the superior race theory. Okay? The racial parliament, told us that. Okay, that started to slowly change in later years, but yeah, far too slow. Everything was already secured by then. And then because it's been far too slow since then, maybe 1904, since it's been continuously slow since then, the conclusion to what they had originally aimed for from right throughout the act of fraudulence via TeTiriti was secured. Okay? But it was the act of the seniorities that did that. They made them show their hand. In various different ways, our Tupuna Mātua tried to fight against what was happening, but of course, were usually too late or had very little success trying what they did try. Okay, even winning some of the wars couldn't stop anything from continuing to happen. The breakdown of all the pillars of our super tribal cultural spiritual way of life, and all its goodness, so much more of it was so very good, and a cultural way of life. We're never going to give up, minus those areas that weren't so good. Why? Because they're not looking good at all, even today. They weren't good to the rest of the world in that time, so we can't see that changing today. All these answers, responses, or what have you to the question helping us to make our minds up and make what we think and what we feel already has been the right decision for us, for our people, for our tamariki, and for our mokopuna, and for their future. Okay, so let's look at the events leading up to, I'm going to open up our as we come up to, we're well into the final part of the hour, about half an hour left for our kōrero today. So luckily we're moving into that. I'm going to bring up our sample copy of He Whakaputanga 1835, obviously written as a duping document, a document to dupe everybody into a huge amount of entreatment that was going to take place right up to some future time. We know for a fact that they didn't actually have the time set in the future when that would be, but the TeTiriti was going to come and it was going to happen, and we feel that it was around about 1838-39 that it was decided fully that the TeTiriti would come, and it would happen in 1840, and that would be February 6th, 1840. That was the date penciled in, and everyone was about to, from that time, stick to that date. Okay, but we have a fair bit of kōrero leading into 1835 that is important for us to here we go, I got it straight away. Important for us to recognize as we roll on into the kōrero. I'm also looking at the summary of kōrero that I've especially got prepared for kōrero like this. But yeah, I did touch on a wee bit of this kōrero earlier, and that is that, we had alliances, partnerships built up over the 1770s onwards, with monarchies of Great Britain, Westminster, Europe. We were working with in order to keep some sort of security bound around our country, not just our country, where we knew that foreigners were coming in and starting to that's in leading up to later years and up into 1815 to the establishment of Te Wakaminenga o Te Runanga ko Huiarau in 1815 and its opening. There was a lot of a lot of stealing was going on. I can't think of the word. Poaching, I guess is the word. Where foreigners were coming into our shores, sneaking in, perhaps at night mostly, when everyone was asleep, taking trees or taking native bush and stuff like that, and stealing things from our shores and then taking off again. Our Tahumaakaakanuimatua was starting to notice evidence of that. Okay, so we started to team up. The alliances that we had with Great Britain right through those years were highly important to us, and they became even more so significant to us as the king, 1832, 1833, 1834, the king of Great Britain of those times. I think we went from King George to King William IV. King William IV around about the time of 1832-33, and then finally 34, when the United Tribes, the Confederation of United Tribes, the Confederation of Chiefs, the whole of the establishment around there. One of the major aims of He Whakaputanga. So it wasn't just a declaration of independence internationally. That was certainly used as the main reason, that the main instigator, and that the aspect that catapulted the whole of the idea into international renown. Our country had suddenly become an independent state, an independent nation of the world. That was a big thing in that time, and they advertised it right across the world. Not something we would do with our mana rangatira, by the way. So it's quite a different thing altogether to us. I guess we as usual, we were a little bit jovial around the whole of the idea. Fancy that. Probably most of our tūpuna mātua would have said, fancy that. Us with an international declaration of independence in the world. They never quite enjoyed operating like that over that time. Okay? But 1833-34, to accompany that confederation, so the establishment of the confederation was one of the major targets, and to accompany that confederation was the Confederation flag. That's the flag you see with the 8-point stars. And that's the difference between the flag and the true flag, the true Confederation flag that was flying, that was brought in to the Declaration of Independence. However, the one that flew on February 6, 1840 was not the Confederation flag. You can actually see it. The pictures painted on that day clearly outline the falsification. Worthy of note in the flag of that day, which was actually a 5-point. If you have a good look, it's a 5-point star flag. That would make it a false flag flying on that day, because the flag given over by King William IV in 1834 to our chiefs to seal the pact that established the Confederation of Chiefs in the country. Another of the reasons we disagree that the Declaration of Independence should be scrapped. The other thing is that it clearly is a precursor to TeTiriti, to the old mani, to the Magna Carta. Okay? Clearly. Alright, so lots of different voyages were being made between here and Great Britain to the King, and so lots of communications were happening. Just like in prior to 1815, King George and our Tahumaakaakanuimatua, they got around King George's perhaps his bench court, and they discussed at length the establishment of te wakaminenga o te runanga ko huiarau. Okay, and then that established in 1815. By 1832-33, different aims were being targeted over that time, and there was a bit of concern of our people over that time. Now, that was largely due to not just the lawlessness, but the actual operations of the Crown representatives in the country, who were adamant that they were going to get their 100% power, authority of governance over the country. They wanted that. They basically wanted our sovereignty, and we were not willing. Right through that whole time, my question is, with that in mind, is why by 1840 would we be open to giving that up? Because I doubt that that was the case. Okay, we never gave up sovereignty right through that time. Why all of a sudden in 1840 would we do that? There was a reason for that, and neither did we do that. They took it, very, very fraudulently, they were in your face to our Tahumaakaakanuimatua, and they didn't care, that they didn't agree that the conundrum should be applied to TeTiriti as a result. You know, the consequence of that was that they had just signed the document. Why should they agree to something that wasn't in the original intentions? And so they upheld the original intentions, and we know that to be the case because they stood up against everything against the original intentions in the years to follow. Okay, so yeah, a lot of the kōrero that I've got before me, talks around a lot of those things that happened. So a flag was gifted by the King, King William, I do believe, the fourth, gifted that to our Tahumaakaakanuimatua. So that was to be one of the central objects of this declaration. The other two reasons for the declaration were not publicly talked about. Neither were they internationally discussed. And this is where we start getting into more of the corrupt, more of the fraudulent, more of the non-transparent, more of the also the unethical and illegal behaviour of Crown representatives in the country. Okay? Because one of the things they wanted to do was scrap the flag. Now you and I know, we know very well that to do something like that was highly treasonous, highly disallowed, especially in a feudal society. You dare do that against the orders of your king, you were gone. Okay? One of the main features in all of this, even leading up to the end of TeTiriti and all of the days that they applied the falsified, fraudulent interpretation and outcomes of TeTiriti via the English version, whilst they applied all of that right throughout the years to follow, that they did not get punished for any of the stuff, not even for what happened around the declaration. Okay, this takes us by surprise. You know, the Crown of Westminster didn't know anything about this. We actually think that they did. We actually think they knew everything that was happening here, and actually were so much a part of it that they didn't care. Okay, so that was one of the aims. You know what another of the aims were? To form a republic in the country. Now, some people over the last 2 centuries have interpreted that as the simple fact that our cultural way of doing things, our governance methods, were Republican. And that's not true. That's not true. That's far from true. Okay? That's far from true. I mean, our first inhabitants of the country came from Tahiti. I mean, as descendants of Moai, Hapu, Iwi. Look, there's a kingship in there. I mean, that tells you our culture is not, you know, we you know, and we have most senior in there, and most senior, and we have Toiou in there. See, so we had aspects, we had concepts that were equal to the task, if not kingships, and we did have kingships as such. See, so we cannot be said to be people that were Republican. I mean, I can recall Winston Peters once calling our way of doing governance a banana republic. You know, I want to talk to him about that, and I'll probably punch his head in by the end of it if he continues with that sort of attitude to our way of doing governance. But he is quite wrong in saying that our way of doing governance is yet by way of establishing a banana republic. That's not true. We, again, were not cavemen. In fact, our culture was far more sophisticated in fact than actually the feudal culture that had come into our country and taken over eventually. Far, far more sophisticated and far more civil, in fact. Okay? I leave that thought with you. I leave that thought with you today. Have a good think about that, because our Tahumaakaakanuimatua were actually far more civil, even though within some of our customs, okay, we did eat people, we did blah 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 blah, but if you looked at a lot of our, you know, the multitude of the majority of the overwhelming areas, the overwhelming majority of areas, of our culture, primarily were far more sophisticated and far more civil and far more ahead in the game over those times. Okay? People ask me, they ask, well, then what, if any, at most, excited the Tahumaakaakanuimatua about the Crown and about Pākehā, the settlers, coming into the country and allowing them to come into the country? I said 2 things: industry and technology. They were the things that excited them. That's what they wanted. Industry and technology. And you look at the industry, what it did. Once Ko Huiaro had the whole of the run of operations of industry in this country, we became part of the biggest economy in the world. The very first and only time that we've ever had that in this country. Very, very successfully was our governance system running in this country, even through 1835. And still, we wanted the 50-50 alliance, 50-50 partnership in the country, where we, with our 50 sorry, not 50 Cent. Hey, I'm thinking of a rapper there. With our 50% share in the power and authority over the country, we get to run our people in the country. That's what that is for. And they get to run theirs. Okay? That's what we're talking about here. This is no banana republic. This is actually a very, very smart, beyond democratic way of operating in governance. Okay? That's how our tupuna mātua did things. Okay? This was not brought into our culture by King George at all. At all. King George helped with a lot of the technical and the systemial areas of the governance system, the ways in which they should work, how to apply those technically and theoretically, and how ethics and ethics and transparencies needed to play their vital role from right throughout the whole of the system. Okay? And that way of operating within our culture has always been that way. That's always been our way. We have always felt, I mean, we even did that super tribally. Like where governance met over our tribes, we always took care of our own tribes, and those of other tribes took care of their tribes. Where they had done wrong, we were allowed to punish, but after that, the tribes that they came from had to take control of those people. Okay. See, there was a whole agenda around working with the law. You couldn't just jump in and apply the law how you see fit, how they're doing, running the law system of our tupuna mātua evolved in this time, quite corruptly. They're running it in opposition to the rightful way of running the law system of old. Okay, why? Because powermongers want to be able to have their say without anyone jumping up and down. They want to all do it in secret, in confidence, in private. And they want to be able to hit people just whenever, wherever, and rere kuri, wherever, whenever they want to, willy-nilly. Okay, and this is the whole problem with operating that same system in this time. We'll never get control of that. Why? Too many crazies have control of it. Too many idiots have control of it. Okay? But applying the positive side of it alongside with a lot of what can be seen as enhancing from modern law perspectives and fraternities and areas of this time can help to make it work. And that's how we're operating within Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi. Okay, and so, there we have it. Te waka menenga o te runanga ko huiarai running successfully. Still some very valid concerns of our tupuna mātua over that time, especially to do with the lawlessness of Pākehā in the country. Okay, again, that same concern. Te rao ngā maha nuka nuka. Ara, kua ara ke ano. Te rao ngā maha nuka nuka. I te motu. Okay? And so we got talking with King William IV around that, King George as well, and came to a point where he whakaputanga was going to take place, where the Confederation was going to be recognised and the whole of the Confederation was to be set up around the flag gifted to our tupuna mātua by King William IV. I do believe. Yeah. That's about 1834. And 1835, we get the whole of the Declaration of Independence being brought into the significance of things. Okay, and this is whilst the musket war was still raging in the country, probably even worse than before, worse than prior. Okay, why? Because they were trying to douse all the flames of the prior fights, of the prior part of the wars. And those fighting in Tūranga Nui a Kiwa and Taupo Nui a Tia and into Hawke's Bay were starting to fire up even more. And the wars were in fact on their way to being closed out just before 1835, 1836, 37. Okay, and then around about that time, along with those of 1833 or roundabouts, starting to hit Wellington area and really starting to bring in the main defence of Wellington area into that area, and then flooding also into the south, where eventually the Tuarangatira were halted and defeated again by our Tahumaakaakanuimatua through the Tahumaakaakanuimatua, yes, but also through many other lines of Tahumaakaakanuimatua or Tutura, Hapu, Iwi in the South Island. Okay, and not just in the top of the south, but also within the Southern Divide, the very divide we were discussion on last week. Okay, and so with all of that, they were looking to set up a republic, and the other thing was that they were looking to, I know I wrote it down here, there were three main ones, set up a republic, the establishment of the Confederation. Oh, and the other one was to get rid of the flag. Just a moment. Apart from the whole of the Declaration of Independence and what that required, you also had but of course these other objectives, these other aims were hidden from the whole of the event. Why? Because they would in fact actually be unlawful and corrupt, and so they weren't included in the actual event, but they were actually what was happening over that time. The Crown representatives of the country disagreed with the Confederation. They didn't want that happening. And a funny thing that, because within TeTiriti you get the feeling that actually they did agree to the Confederation, because they included it in TeTiriti quite clearly. Everything in fact was entreated through the Confederation, as you clearly see in the translation that we have all been able to be part of. Okay, so in the first article of the Declaration, in the entreatment, we get just entitled with the number 1, Ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira o ngā iwi, o nu tīreni, I raro mai o hauraki, Pauti nei te huihui I Waitangi, again another document signing at Waitangi, I tokerang Ruangahuru Māwaru o Ketopa 1835, taihumano warurai, 35, is there a comma? Sorry, full stop. Ka wakaputa I te rangatiratanga o tō mātou wenua. Ka mea tia, ka wakaputa ia e mātou he wenua rangatira kia huaina. 6699 quote, ko te waka minanga o ngā hapu o nu tīreni, unquote. And full stop. Okay? And quite clearly there, we by and large get the full agreement, the total unanimous agreement to the establishment of the waka minanga o ngā hapu o nu tīreni, or the Confederation of Chiefs. Okay? That's establishing the Confederation of Chiefs. Let's run through our entire translation for this. Quite different to all prior translations, and we know why. Same reasons as with TeTiriti. People are just oblivious to the nuances in this now. People are oblivious to the way it is organised and the way it is utilised amongst our hapu iwi. If you understand reo hapu iwi, then you understand the way it's organised normally, or naturally, or the way it falls naturally. Okay? So Article 1, this is what it says. This is our translation. This is as literal as you're going to get. And that was most of the problem with all of the other translations. With Busby's one, hopefully I made it clear. But his translation was way off, and it was way off in terms that if he had started off with the English version first, then his attempts to try to translate that within this time was quite inaccurate. See, you have to look at his English version first though. It's either quite a poor attempt at translating the reo, or it was in actual fact the other way around, and that the English version was the first part of the document, the article that was in place first. We think the latter, because we understand how people translate, and there's no way that Busby could have attempted in any way to translate this document literally. And the reason for that is because he had already formulated his own ideas on what should go into that document. And exactly what he's saying in the English version, we're going to run through his English version because it matters in this case where the declaration is concerned, and you'll see what he's saying. And you know, it's possible that he was being corrupt in that way, and that he took into this document the simple fact that the reo was never going to be up to scratch anyway. Okay? The missionaries obviously assisted in the translation of the English, and as close as they came, a literal translation of this reo would show us that actually they were quite a fair way from what Busby had. So that's why the English version matters with the declaration. We're going to look at that next week. We've only got time for this first article this week, and I needed to get through X amount of kōrero this week. And so, Article 1, he took in into this the simple fact that the reo was never going to be up to scratch, and he didn't care. See, all these things that they did here added to the simple fact that it was never going to be as successful as TeTiriti was going to be. Aroha mai. See, and this is how we know that they got some help with TeTiriti, because it was so remarkably on target. to the native ear. Takutaringa, I'm native. Takutaringa, karongoana hau ki te kupu a te tiriti. You know, tino matataua hau ki te rā reo, ki te tikanga anō o te kupu kai roto I te tiriti. I know for a fact, well defined in te reo is te tiriti, and well laid out is te reo of te tiriti. Not so in the declaration. Why? Because Busby didn't care in this time. He didn't put as much care as he did into te tiriti. That's why you get the straight deal with te tiriti. That's why you get the clarity, and to the native ear, they were able to grab everybody right away and manipulate everybody. Te tiriti wasn't meant to dupe at all. Everyone was already duped by this. And in actual fact, te tiriti was meant to manipulate e tatama. Okay? And so, Article 1, we, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes and or super tribes, iwi, remember that word, ko mātou, ko ngā tino rangatira o ngā iwi. There we have that all sound, that all characteristic coming through the reo. That's your reo hapu iwi. Now we can't work out whether Busby knew the form of reo that was being utilised here, but it's highly likely that he didn't really understand most things about this reo. And in fact it was just a missionary's translation or version of the English version that he had basically published before then. Okay, and so we'll get to look at that next week. But here's our translation. We, the hereditary chiefs and heads of the preeminent united tribes and or super tribes of New Zealand to the north of Hauraki, having just reached unanimous consensus in this here at Waitangi, in the Northern Territories, on the 28th of October 1835, do solemnly declare our land sovereign, independent and interdependent. So whilst acknowledging and recognizing them constitutionally sovereign, independent and interdependent lands, full stop, as at and or were, as at and or were. That's just additional to our translation to help with the explanation of definition going on through there. As at and or were under the auspices of the designated quote, ko te wakaminanga o ngā hapu o New Tireni, unquote, or the, quote, the Confederation of Chiefs and the United Tribes and or Super Tribes of New Zealand, full stop, unquote. Okay, so that's our translation of the first article. Now, when we have a look at the English version in our next quarter or next week from the East, you'll learn what I mean about the lack of care taken with the translations in terms of the translation from the English into te reo, and how as a result of that lack of care, initially the native ear was not taken control of and manipulated. Once they knew they could do that from 1838, 1839 on, they thought they were home and house. And